February 14th, 1929. Valentine's Day in Chicago. While most Americans were exchanging flowers and chocolates, 7 men gathered inside a cold brick garage at 2122 North Clark Street. They were waiting for a truck carrying hijacked whiskey, a routine business transaction in Prohibition-era Chicago. At exactly 10:30 a.m., a black Cadillac police car pulled up outside. 4 men stepped out, 2 wearing Chicago Police Department uniforms, 2 in civilian clothes. The men inside the garage saw the uniforms and assumed it was just another raid. They'd been through this before. You comply, maybe pay a fine, and you're back on the street by dinner. They had no idea that in less than 90 seconds, they would all be dead, and the killers would simply walk away. What happened in that garage on Valentine's Day became the most notorious mass murder in American mob history, a massacre so shocking that it turned public opinion against organized crime forever and changed the course of American law enforcement. But here's what makes this case even more disturbing. The mastermind behind it was never charged. The killers were never caught. And the truth of what really happened that morning died with the victims. This is the story of how a fake police raid became real mass murder, and how one man's ambition to control Chicago's underworld led to the bloodiest 90 seconds the city had ever seen. The 7 men in that garage weren't innocent civilians, but they were human beings. 6 worked for George Bugs Moran, one of Chicago's most powerful bootleggers. The 7th was an optometrist named Reinhard Schwimmer, who had befriended the gang. He liked the excitement of being around criminals. He was just there for the thrill. The others included Frank and Peter Gusenberg, brothers who'd grown up on Chicago's North Side, Adam Heyer, Moran's business manager, Albert Weinshank, who managed Moran's speakeasies, James Clark, Moran's brother-in-law, and Albert Kachelek, an enforcer. These weren't random victims. They were specifically targeted. And the man they all worked for, Bugs Moran himself, should have been there. He was running late that morning, walking toward the garage when he saw the police car pull up. Assuming it was a raid, he turned around and walked away. That decision saved his life. To understand why this massacre happened, you need to understand Chicago in 1929. Prohibition had turned the city into a war zone. The 18th Amendment banned alcohol, but it didn't stop people from drinking. It just made criminals rich. Bootleggers like Al Capone and Bugs Moran fought for control of speakeasies, breweries, and distribution routes. The money was staggering. Capone's organization was making an estimated $100 million per year. But Capone wanted more. He controlled the South Side. Moran controlled the North Side. The 2 gangs had been fighting for years, engaging in drive-by shootings, bombings, and assassinations. By early 1929, Capone had had enough. He wanted Moran dead. He wanted the North Side. And he was willing to orchestrate the most elaborate hit in mob history to get it. In the days before February 14th, Capone's organization set a trap. They arranged for a Detroit bootlegger to contact Moran's gang about a shipment of old log cabin whiskey being hijacked from a Detroit warehouse. The price was too good to refuse. The delivery would arrive at the North Clark Street garage at 10:30 a.m. on Valentine's Day. It was the perfect bait. Moran's men would all be there, waiting for the truck, and Capone had something else planned, something they'd never see coming. What makes this setup so chilling is the level of planning involved. Capone's men had been watching the garage for weeks. They knew who would be there. They knew the layout. They'd even acquired a black Cadillac, that looked exactly like the ones used by the Chicago Police Department. Complete with a police bell, they had police uniforms. They had studied how real raids worked. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. This was a carefully choreographed execution. When the Cadillac pulled up, the men inside the garage didn't panic. Police raids were common. The two men in police uniforms walked in first, guns drawn, and ordered everyone to line up against the north wall, hands up. This was standard procedure. The men complied without resistance. Then the two men in civilian clothes entered. They were carrying Thompson submachine guns, Tommy guns, weapons that could fire 600 rounds per minute, the kind of weapons police didn't carry. The victims realized what was happening in the last seconds of their lives. These weren't cops conducting a raid. This was an execution. The Thompson guns opened fire. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. A continuous roar that lasted maybe 15 seconds. 70 rounds were fired. The men against the wall didn't have time to run, to fight back, to even fully comprehend what was happening. When the shooting stopped, all 7 men were down. Then, in a horrifying detail that shows just how calculated this was, the killers made it look like a legitimate police action. The 2 plainclothes officers raised their hands as if they'd been arrested, and the 2 uniformed officers marched them out at gunpoint. To anyone watching from across the street, it looked like police had raided the garage, arrested 2 criminals, and were taking them into custody. The Cadillac drove away. The entire operation had taken less than 90 seconds. The only survivor, initially, was Frank Gusenberg. When police arrived at the actual scene minutes later, they found him still breathing despite 14 gunshot wounds. An officer asked him who shot him. Gusenberg, following the gangster code to his last breath, said, "Nobody shot me." He died 3 hours later without saying another word. The crime scene was unlike anything Chicago had seen. Blood pooled across the garage floor. Shell casings littered the ground. The wall was pockmarked with bullet holes. 6 men were already dead. The 7th died at the hospital. Even hardened police officers were shaken by the brutality. The public reaction was immediate and intense. This wasn't a shootout between rival gangs. This was a cold-blooded massacre disguised as a police action. The fake police car, the uniforms, the military-style execution, it was too much. Newspaper headlines screamed about the Valentine's Day massacre. Photos of the bodies ran in papers across the country. For the first time, public opinion began to turn against organized crime. These weren't romantic Robin Hood figures. They were brutal killers willing to murder 7 men in broad daylight. Police immediately suspected Al Capone. Everyone did. The hit was too elaborate, too well planned to be anyone else. But Capone had an airtight alibi. He was in Florida, meeting with the Dade County solicitor at the exact time of the murders. He'd made sure he was seen in public, at an official meeting, 1,500 miles away from Chicago. When asked about the massacre, Capone said, "The only man who kills like that is Bugs Moran." It was a masterful deflection. The investigation went nowhere. Witnesses claimed they saw nothing. The killers had vanished. The Cadillac was found abandoned and burned. The Tommy guns were never recovered. Nobody talked. In May 1929, police got a break. They found the house in Michigan where the killers had planned the hit. They recovered 2 Thompson submachine guns that ballistics linked to the massacre. But the killers were gone. Years later, one man, Fred "Killer" Burke, was suspected of being one of the shooters. He was arrested in 1931 for killing a police officer in Michigan. and police found weapons that matched the massacre ballistics. But he was never charged with the St. Valentine's Day massacre. He died in prison in 1940. Other suspected participants died violent deaths in the years that followed. Jack McGurn, one of Capone's top enforcers and the suspected organizer, was shot to death on Valentine's Day 1936. Exactly 7 years after the massacre, a Valentine card was left on his body. The St. Valentine's Day massacre changed everything. Public pressure forced law enforcement to take organized crime seriously. The federal government assigned Elliot Ness and his untouchables to take down Capone. They couldn't get him for murder, but they got him for tax evasion in 1931. Al Capone went to prison. His empire crumbled. The age of the Chicago bootlegger ended. Bugs Moran survived but never recovered his power. He later said, "Only Capone kills like that." When asked about his rivalry with Capone, he added, "He killed 7 of my friends, but I wouldn't trade places with him for all the money in the world. He'll go to hell before I do." The garage at 2122 North Clark Street became a grim tourist attraction. People came to see where it happened, to touch the bullet-riddled wall. In 1967, the building was demolished. A Canadian businessman bought the bricks from the death wall and tried to sell them, but they developed a reputation for being cursed. Anyone who owned them experienced misfortune. Today, the site is a parking lot. There's no marker, no memorial, but Chicago hasn't forgotten. The 7 victims were buried in Chicago cemeteries. Most have simple headstones. Their families never got justice in the legal sense, but history remembers them as victims of Prohibition's violence. 7 men who died because they were in the wrong garage on the wrong morning, caught in a war between 2 men who cared more about power than human life. The St. Valentine's Day massacre stands as a reminder of what happens when organized crime operates unchecked, when law enforcement is corrupted, and when violence becomes just another business tool. It took 7 deaths on Valentine's Day to finally wake up America to the truth about its most famous gangster. The massacre was never officially solved. Al Capone was never charged. The actual shooters were never prosecuted. But everyone knew the truth, and 96 years later, we still remember their names.